Glad you're with us for this devotional this morning. We are going to look at Romans 8:26 and 27. And as we do that, I want to ask you a question. Do you think that it's more important in your prayer life that you know what the will of God is so that you can pray for it? Or do you have a heart that is set, that longs for the will of God to be done, even if you don't know what it is? Now, I don't want to set up a false dichotomy between these two. I think they're both helpful, important. But in these verses, Paul wants to emphasize that one of these is absolutely crucial in our prayer life. He says this, "Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind or the mindset of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for us according to the will of God." So Paul's been talking about how we live in a broken world, a world subject to futility. Things don't work the way that they ought to. And we too are weak and broken. And one of our weaknesses is that we don't know the perfect step-by-step will of God. And Paul wants to tell us that we don't need to be crippled in our prayer life because of this ignorance. We don't need to worry that the will of God can't come to pass in our lives because we don't know what it is to pray for it. No, there is one who knows the perfect will of God, the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is, as it were, searching throughout the earth to give strong support to those whose heart is whole towards God, to those who have a mindset. As he searches hearts, he's looking for a heart set, a mindset on the things of God, a heart that longs for the will of God to be done, even if we don't know what it is. And when the Spirit sees that in you, that transformation in you by the power of Jesus, he says, even though that person doesn't know the perfect will of God, I do. And I'm going to pray that the will of God will come to pass in their life. And the Father says, I'm going to answer those prayers of the Holy Spirit. So you don't need to be worried, anxious. The will of God can't come to pass in my life because I don't know what it is. Now, these verses are appropriate to look at this time in the calendar of church history as we get ready to remember and celebrate St. Patrick tomorrow. Patrick was a 6th century Christian. When he was 16, he was captured in Britain by Irish pirates, brought back to Ireland, sold into slavery as a shepherd. He wasn't a Christian at the time, but he grew up in a Christian home, and so he heard the scriptures, he heard the gospel, and during this time of suffering, he remembers the gospel, and God gives him faith. God causes him to be born anew, and he becomes a believer. 6 years later, he escapes. He comes back to Britain. He's reunited with his family. They thought he was dead. And he says in his confession document that we have that he wrote that he was able to put behind him his own personal suffering during that time. He was able to forget it, but he was not able to put behind him and forget the suffering of the Irish people because they did not have the good news of Jesus Christ. So he longs to go back and bring the gospel to them. But he's torn because his family doesn't want him ever to leave again. They lost him for 6 years. They thought he was dead, and here he is back. They don't want him to go back to Ireland. And so in this time of turmoil and uncertainty, he has a series of dreams. And in one of these dreams, Patrick says he perceived that someone was inside him praying. He doesn't know what this person was praying, but he wakes up encouraged because he remembers the words of Paul, that the Spirit is interceding for us according to the will of God, even when we don't know what it is. So he's encouraged by this. He's launched into, this is one of the things that launches him into a lifetime of faithful ministry. Ireland is transformed because of what God did in Patrick and through Patrick. So you too, believer, if you have the Spirit of God in you, interceding for you, you can be confident that even though you don't know what the will of God is, the Spirit knows, and he is praying for you according to the will of God. Set your mind, set your heart on the things of God. Long for, ask the Spirit to help you long for the will of God to come to pass. And it will in your life by the power and intercession of the Holy Spirit.